everyone, it's Annabelle. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to talk a little bit about my Paphiopedilum American hybrid who flowered for me in the autumn and is finished flowering, putting out lots of new growths, and I would like to repot. You can see from the disturbance at the top of the LECA Seramis mix that this has quite an extensive root system as it's pushed all of the media down from up in the pot to the top of the pot. So you can tell that it's doing very well. Obviously it's a very large plant. I haven't repotted it in maybe 2 years. I keep meaning to do it and just never getting around to it because it's so healthy and doing well. But I'm in a kind of repotting session at the moment. It's spring, got lots of new growths, and I just wanted to get this out of the pot while I've got time, talk through it with you guys and put it into a new pot. I've got some new outer pots that I think will be really good for it. So this is the 18cm pot from the Plastic Box company. I'll link them down below. So this one's going to be much bigger than the current pot that it's in, which I think will be much better for it. With this one, it's not ever really, I've planted it deep enough I think that it's never struggled with the dry top layer, because with Paphiopedilums particularly, also Paphiopedilums I think, because they're kind of terrestrial or lithophytic, they naturally would always kind of have very moist roots that are often found either terrestrially or growing alongside streams. So they don't really want aerial roots coming out ever. I think it must be at least 2 years since I repotted this, because I remembered during my intro video nearly a year ago pointing out that it had a root coming up through the top and that was bad. So I'm going to repot it, put it into, it's in a 15cm pot at the moment. I'm going to pop it into the 18cm pot, which will give it a lot more room I think. And yeah, just talk through its care with you. So they like to be constantly moist. So it's in a mix of Seramis and LECA. That was kind of what I was using at the time. Since I've kind of found other mixes, so I'm going to put a little bit of pumice in there as well, and we're going to do a top layer. So I'm just going to literally take this out of the pot and we're going to reuse, because with terrestrial orchids it's not so important that there's big air gaps. Like with epiphytic orchids you want kind of constant air gaps between each media particle. If there's like algae in here or anything, I'm not particularly bothered about it. Got a few dead leaves, don't seem to be coming off very easily, but nothing particularly major. It's quite hard to get it on camera because it's quite big, but the oldest fans are this side, and I've got a few yellowing leaves, but I've never really had any old fans die off or anything, so it's a very big orchid, worth bearing in mind. So we're going to reuse the old media. Like I said, for this orchid I'm not particularly worried about air pockets. Pretty solid in there. It dries out very quickly, and I know I've been letting this run too dry, so I knew it was time for a repot really, because I've been letting it dry out a bit too much. Just draining off the old reservoir into the new pot. Might as well reuse those nutrients since I've only just watered them. But yeah, this is not coming out. So that's the kind of mix. It was in quite a Seramis heavy mix by the looks of things. Really difficult to remember what I actually repot these into sometimes. So you can see a lot of fuzzy roots. They've tried coming to the top there, then they've stopped growing where they've sort of surfaced. I think this is because there's not enough room in the pot, so they've gone round and round and then come up. They're attached very firmly in there. So what I am going to try and do now, I think they're actually attached to the pot. So I'm going to go and flush this very heavily through the tap and see if I can get them to detach, although it is quite moist in there. So I've run it under the tap, and because it's got Seramis in, these holes aren't very quick to drain. So it filled up right to the top with water very easily, and you can see it's got a lot more movement in the pot now. So we're going to try again. do still have a root really stuck to the pot there, which has just come off. Which is a shame, but we've lost one root. Oh well, it's got plenty of roots in there, so shouldn't be a problem. It's just annoying. So I'm going to fill the new pot up to about there with the old media. Pop the orchid in. Let's just take a quick look at the root system first. A new root tip growing there, a couple of new tips. It's obviously actively growing at the moment. It's got a good root system. I'm going to plant it, just try and get you down a little bit to show you more of what I'm doing. I'm going to plant it about there. So we don't want it, it's got a, basically we don't want those new roots emerging from fans high up in the air because they will just dry out. They're not epiphytic orchids. They don't want lots of aeration and they will stop growing. If there isn't enough moisture, or if there's too low humidity, or if there's like a dry desiccating top layer around the roots. What I'm going to do to try and troubleshoot this dry top layer issue is actually this time to use the aquarium gravel as a top layer, which I've been doing with a lot of other orchids. They aren't going to stay very moist, but they're also not porous, so they shouldn't desiccate the roots and they should keep the media underneath nice and moist. So I am going to put a little bit of LECA in this, but I'm going to mainly put Seramis in because it was mainly in Seramis before. So I'm going to reuse the old media and put a bit more Seramis in because we're in a bigger pot now. So we've got to think that actually the top layer of a larger pot is going to stay drier than the top layer of a shorter pot. To compensate, I have put the reservoir holes up quite high. Position it a little bit further back in the pot to give it plenty of room to grow, although they do tend to sprout new growths from all over. Trying to fill up any air gaps in there with the media because we don't want, with inorganic media obviously it's going to be quite airy anyway, so we don't want large chunks of air gaps in there. Okay, so I'm happy with the level of the actual media now. So what I'm going to do is fill to the top of the pot with the gravel, just in case any roots emerge, just to keep the top like nice and moist. While not actually filling around the orchid with something that's going to be porous and will retain water. So I found that that's quite handy in orchids that want to be moist right up to the top, but they also don't want a soggy base. So I've got some new aquarium gravel, which is completely smooth. All of the pebbles are smooth, whereas my horticultural grit, some of them were porous and a bit rough, so I was finding sometimes it caused a few issues. And that is my Paphiopedilum American hybrids all repotted. You can see the top layer, it's probably about this thick, just to stop any new roots emerging into the air. It's not going to stay particularly moist. If you're growing in bark, that's kind of the level I'd probably recommend. Obviously if you're growing in moss, you might want to adjust slightly, or semi-hydro with LECA, I would definitely recommend burying as much as you can if you struggle with dry top layers, because you don't want the new roots coming out into a really dry, desiccating environment. It needs to stay kind of moist around the new roots. You saw how kind of brown and fuzzy they are. They're not epiphytic roots, they've got root hairs. They really want as much moisture as they can get. Obviously they don't want to be growing in like a peat bog. They still need some aeration, they still need oxygen around the roots, but it's just a different ratio to an epiphytic orchid, so it's worth just bearing that in mind to really try and combat any dryness around the new root tips. So we'll see how this goes. Obviously you saw that it was doing very well in the LECA Seramis mix it was in, but I just think this top layer will help it a little bit more, because it was getting new roots that were coming up and then they were like desiccating because, you know, it was no longer humid and moist. So we'll see how this goes. Obviously it's doing very well, so I'm very happy with it, and it's now in an 18 centimetre pot. I've positioned it with the older fans towards the back and the newer fans towards the front, but not loads, just to give it a little bit more room to grow into the pot. Although now that I've said that, it'll probably sprout a random new fan at the back. They tend to do funny things like that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then don't forget to give it a like or subscribe to my channel for more regular orchid updates. And I'll see you guys all later. Bye!